red light is on. I have to make sure that the red light is off at the end of the time, because otherwise we record all the stuff after class, which is really kind of silly. All right, you guys ready? Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I have attention, please? All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead and take your notes out so you've got those at the ready. We're going to be writing down notes continually on the Mongols and the aftermath. Trying to make sure I remember exactly where you are with respect to, like, say, the other class. And I can actually double check because you guys are really good note takers, so I can look and see. I can just look at your notes and see what did you write down. Good. Yeah, actually, no, that's good. So we did get to tariff then, didn't we? Yes, good. So we got to, like, security challenges, and that mostly went away in the Mongol Empire. So if you're a merchant, you could travel through the Mongol territories, and that worked out really well. And then we also talked about the tariff issue as well. Yes? So we're going to be talking about the Mongol invasion trade. Should we talk about death? Pandemics? Are you a little too sensitive to, like, will that make you feel bad if I talk about people dying from diseases? No? I mean, I used to have, it's kind of like, how many of you guys are, like, into dark things like Halloween and scary, and you like to dress, you like to dress up real scary, or like your house? Any of you guys have, like, decorations in your outside your house that are really kind of frightening and scary and so forth? No? Some of you do, right? I mean, I learned growing up that you have to be careful when you try and scare people. How many of you guys like to scare people? Right? I mean, like, sneak up on them, you know, or you find somebody's, like, really sensitive, you're like, oh, yeah, this is going to be fun. So, like, yeah, you have to kind of be knowledgeable of that. So, like, when I was in college, I'll tell you a story. When I was in college, I had a roommate, and I saw that he was going to be, the way that the dorm was configured, I saw that he was going to be walking up the stairs in such a way, and I thought, oh, I'll get him. I went into the room next to the room that we shared, and I was, like, in that doorway waiting for him to walk by, and then I was going to jump out and go boo and scare him, right? I mean, that seems like a pretty simple thing, right? How many of you guys ever done anything like that? Like, hello, yeah. But I didn't realize that behind him, walking about 3-4 paces, was one of the most flighty people in the entire dorm, right? She lived on the 3rd floor, and so when I jumped out to scare my roommate, I didn't realize she was there, and she was scared, and she screamed really loud, which scared me like you don't know what. So anyway, you live and learn these lessons, because I learned the hard way that if I snuck up on my younger sister while she was brushing her teeth and scared her, you don't do that if they have a glass of water in their hand, because the water might have a gravitational attraction to you, especially if she thrusts it in that direction. That happened to me. So don't be scared, too bad, when we talk about the Black Death components of this history, because it's actually a very interesting component, but this is a weird year, right? So, for example, I'm going to go through the notes, make sure you've got everything you need to know, and I'm going to go ahead and, I mean, it's kind of like, for a lot of my classes, we do a lot of note-taking. I mean, this is the truth throughout the year. But I'm also trying to do creative things and so forth. And so, like in the 9th grade class, typically, I think I've told you about this before, we did like this Mongol trading game thing, right? And so two considerations are coming in. It's like we don't have as much time in class, right? You know, you're gone half the time. Good grief. Other people come and sit in these chairs that are 9th graders. But that's the other half of the class because it's just smaller. And we're not supposed to be, like, interacting and so forth and so on. And yet, I came up with this game. I invented a game, and I still want to do it, and we're going to do it today. A limited version. It's the Mongol trading game. So everyone's going to get one of these, and you're going to fill it out and so forth. But instead of the typical rules where everyone's moving around and trading and all kinds of interactive and, you know, breathing and, you know, touching and danger and stuff we can't do, we'll figure it out. I think we're going to be like, you're going to be like kind of making trades with people across the class. So for example, when I would do this, you and you would have like, I would be, say, a Mongol trader. I would trade horses from Mongolia, and let's just say I'm grabbing the first one off the thing. You're a precious wood dealer from Indonesia. And it's round one, and so we decide that we're going to trade. And so I write down on my piece of paper, as a Mongol trade dealer, I write down that I get precious woods from, this also helped me to learn the names a lot quicker, Becca. And so I would write down like Becca and so forth and yada, 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 yada. And then you would write down like, well, I don't actually do the game, it's just you guys. But nevertheless, you would write down who the person was, say Mr. Hansen, and you got horses from Mongolia. Round one. And we keep doing that round two, round three, round four. And everyone's moving around and so forth. It's all kind of crazy and so forth. And the goal is to make money. How many guys like games where there's like a competitive thing? You can win. How many guys are like, I don't like games where you can win. I want everyone. But this is like competitive. And especially like in bigger classes, we'll have like 2 or 3 horse dealers from Mongolia. And they'll be in competition with each other to like get the most money at the end of the trading. Because that's what's going on back then during the time of the Mongol trade. And it goes on right now. Right, think of it. Raise your hand if you can tell me, what is a company that has been very successful in trading and has taken up a big, huge part of the market? So they've got like a massive fleet of delivery vehicles, and they have distribution centers that are being built right now outside of Nampa. Amazon, yeah. I mean, it's like, that's big. I mean, Amazon has figured out some things, and as a result, they make a lot of profits. They get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So it's part of the whole competition thing. So it's an interesting component. But write this down. With more people interacting with each other, as takes place during the time of the Mongols, you have the potential for the spread of disease. Okay? So I want to still do the game with you guys and so forth. It's going to be abbreviated, and instead of having physically walk around and so forth in class, we'll figure something out like where you're just like, I don't know, can you communicate to this person right over here? Can you? Okay, I'm going to, Sophia, can you communicate to Ty? Can you? Ty? Eye contact, Sophia? Can be like round one, you, me, boom, that's it. Huh? I mean, it's hard. It's easier when you can actually physically kind of go around and stand next to each other and write down the information. But we'll see how this works. I mean, it's like once upon a time in Chicago, they had like live trading. People would physically go in there and trade futures on, I don't know, pork bellies and orange and things like that and so forth. Now it's all computerized. When it was all humans, they'd be like doing all these shouting and fingers and so forth, and they got really good at it, and they knew what they were doing. I mean, 2 people, right? Spencer and I could be communicating like going do, 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 do like that, and we could make a deal worth several $100,000s, and we knew what we were doing because we were using these hand gestures. Well, that's all old-fashioned. Now they do it with computers. And you're not all connected like a computer network and so forth. But I mean, if you wanted to, you can go to the stock market, get enough money in the bank, you can buy something with a few keystrokes, right? So you guys will try to do it physically, not coming in contact with each other so as not to spread COVID or whatever other kinds of things you asymptomatic disease spreaders are carrying. I hope none of you are asymptomatic disease spreaders. Raise your hand if you're an asymptomatic disease spreader. Like, I hope not. I mean, I don't know. But we lessen that chance by not having that contact. And then we'll be able to do the other aspects of the game, which involve the Black Death part. I mean, sometimes there's a little bit of surprise and so forth. But let's make sure we have this very clear with you guys right now. Okay? By way of review, and I think we've actually gotten these points across pretty well. By way of review, let me ask Marin. Why did merchants make so much money? Listen very carefully and see if she gets it all, otherwise I'll be calling on you. Why did merchants make so much money during the time of the Mongol Empire? Okay, very good. You guys have that part? Didn't have to pay lots of security because who was providing security through the Mongol, at least the Mongol Empire area? Very good. Next, keep going. You're doing great. Okay, what's a tariff? Just to remind ourselves, what's a tariff? A tax that you pay when? When you enter a new territory, a new country kind of thing. Does that all sound familiar? Very good. So that keeps the cost of business pretty good. So then if you don't have a lot of costs of doing business, how are you going to make a lot of money selling stuff? You sell to the buyers at a high price, low price, a good price that you can profit from. Yeah. And so you get buyers over beyond your territory on the furthest fringes of like the western part of Europe. They're buying all your stuff at reasonable prices for them. They can afford it, and you can do a lot of volume, you know that word? A lot of volume, a lot of stuff. And for each unit that you're selling off, you're making a profit, and that's doing pretty well. Okay? In fact, your business now, you're hiring all these other people to go on those trade routes and buy stuff and sell things, and it's like lots and lots of trade. Right? No surprises, anyone? Okay. So what's the worst thing that could happen to your business then? When we get to this, it's like, well, you die and then your kids get the business, and so they get the benefit and so forth. What's a bad thing that could happen to all that business going on during the Mongol time period? Well, the competition is always going to be there. That's a good point. Not everyone is going to be successful. I mean, it's kind of like unfair. All of a sudden, you're like, yay, we can make lots of money, and then all of a sudden, what the heck? Where did all my business competitors come from? And they're trying to outmaneuver and outprice you and so forth and do all these kinds of things. So competition is always a problem anytime, even during the good times. But what's a bad thing that can happen to merchants that are making a lot of trades during the time of the Mongol Empire? Tell me, Bella. Do you want the Mongol? You guys are all traders, not traitors. You're loyal to your country, I presume. You're a trader. You make money. You're a merchant. What bad thing could happen to the Mongol Empire? Okay, we're going to get to the disease part, okay? We will get to the disease part. Everyone keeps going like, we could die. Yes, okay, so that's a personal thing. We haven't heard it yet. What is it? What could be bad? Like, if you're I'll make it easy. You're a merchant. Do you like the Mongol Empire? You're a merchant. Do you like the Mongol Empire? Is it good for business? Yes. Keeps costs down. You don't have lots of security costs. You don't have lots of tariff costs. So what's something bad that could happen to the Mongol Empire? It could go away, exactly. Do you have that in your notes? When the Mongol Empire goes away, right, when it is broken apart, because what rises often falls. And in history, a lot of times you see empires rise, and then over time they fall, right? There's a lot of dynamism in the early years, and then maybe later on they're like, they can't quite figure out how to get it done, and they're just like, they fall apart. And when the Mongol Empire falls apart, and instead of one big powerful country there, you have lots of different countries, and some of them don't have control over their crime and things going on in their areas. And so then if you're still in business, how many tariffs are you going to be paying? Lots more. How much security you're going to be paying? More. And how much are your customers going to be paying for the goods that you finally deliver to them? They're going to pay more or they can't afford it. And that's not good for business. All right? I don't know. Is that it? I mean, is there some other ramification? Let's say you're over here in Spain or Portugal and you're like, but I want my silk from China. I want my spices and things from India. Isn't there another way to get there besides those crime-infested, tariff-ridden roads that you go through? Exactly, and that's where we're going to be talking about that, going around. Right, we did talk about that a little bit before. Yeah, that's kind of where things are coming. Find a trade route that goes around by the oceans. Okay? Now, is that pretty clear? Good. So put this down as well. In addition to all the money being made by merchants, you have a lot of spread of ideas, more travel of people and ideas. I mean, the ideas travel and so forth. So people are like, in Europe, they could become much more aware of China, especially because, I don't know, there's this guy in Italy. He and his older relatives, they go travel to China. Marco, thank you very much. His name is Marco Polo. He's from Italy. He writes a book. This is before printing presses. It's a bestseller in Europe. And he's writing about all these cool things in Mongol-controlled China. So all these ideas are spreading, and of course, especially in Europe. Man, they love all those goods that come to them that they can't get in Europe. Spices and silks and all kinds of cool things. So ideas and culture spread, but also spreads disease. Make sure you put this in your notes. Well, you're like, what do you want me to do, a drawing? Like this map or something? If you want, you can like write in words what is depicted on this map. And on this map, you see the outbreak in the early 1300s. It happened before, but this was a big outbreak. And it came wave after wave. It wasn't just like one wave. Outbreak of the bubonic plague, the Black Death. Some of you guys know a little bit about the bubonic plague, Black Death. Can you catch it from another person? Yes, you can. And in fact, the darn thing about that thing is the person could catch it. Let's say you're a merchant. You catch it, and maybe you got a little bit of a sniffle at first, but you're like, I got to keep working. And so you continue on your rounds, and you're talking to the people who you're trading with. And then, like, within a week or so, you're not feeling so good. Right? And then maybe you die. That sucks. It's a very deadly disease. Question. Were you contagious at any point that you could spread it? When were you contagious? When you started feeling it. Even that early stage. So that's where the Black Death is really dangerous. Because somebody could be contagious and spread it to other people when they're still feeling sort of well. That's why COVID is like annoying. Because people can be asymptomatic. You could actually be feeling quite fine. If you start feeling like, I can't taste my lunch. If one of your friends says, I have no taste of my lunch, that's a sign that maybe you actually have COVID, but you're asymptomatic. You don't feel a fever or anything, but that's one of the signs, apparently, for some people that are asymptomatic, that get COVID. They lose some of the taste. It's kind of weird. But the Black Death was really bad that way because, I mean, if it was a disease that would kill you, boom, in like 24 hours, how much would that spread? It wouldn't, yeah, because most of the people who caught it right away would be dead within 24 hours. But the darn thing about the Black Death is it spread because it didn't kill people right away. But it's very contagious. What's another way besides people-to-people contact? I think you guys know this, yes?
Rats.
What about rats? What do rats come up and go, and bite you? What? So yeah, I mean, even if you're transporting silk, you still got to transport like some food along the way, and the rats like to get into the food and get into the grain and so forth. Was it the rats that were the deadly part, or what about the rats? Yes, the fleas on the rats. The fleas on the rats could carry the bubonic plague, and the fleas on the rats jump off, get on your little skin and go, take a bite, infect you with the Black Death. So that's another way that it was spread. Okay, so you could have, like if you noticed on some of these trade routes, like you've got like land routes and you've got water routes in the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. And on those ships, you could have them transporting food and then just rats like in the hulls of the ships. And the rats were the fleas, and then when you arrive in a port city, boom, the rats come off the ship because they're like, oh, well, let's take a look and see what's going on here. And then the fleas jump off the rats, and that's really very bad. I've got for you, so between the time that you, from here until the next time, it's like, I want to say like 8 minutes. There's one, it's a powerful, short, to the point, Black Death video from the Millennium series. So you'll be watching that at home. Okay? But it's horrible. Curious. Anybody? No. I'm not sure if you would. It started in the East. Write that down. It started in the East, mostly kind of in the Chinese area, and spread along the trade routes into the Middle East and into Europe. So all those areas where there was a lot of back and forth going on with all that trade going on, that's how the Black Death spread. Curious if anyone knows. Why did it start in China? Where did COVID start? China. Where do a lot of flus and diseases start? Does anyone know why that is? No. Follow up. Something about where they live. Where do these diseases come from? Where do a lot of diseases that cause problems for humans come from? I know we said China, but in China, it's okay, in China, because you wrote that part down, in China, where do they come from? Animals, domestic animals. You can write that down. Pigs, chickens, horses. A lot of them from pigs, okay? And some of them from other ones. Sometimes you get them from like chickens and stuff. And these diseases kind of jump over into the human population. You're like, how do they jump over to the human population? What are there? A lot of animals living in close proximity with a lot of humans. That's it. You got that? If you have humans and animals in close proximity with each other, how many of you guys have got pigs and chickens and so forth in your house? Well, then do you really? Oh, yes. Do they share a room with you? No. I don't live with pigs and chickens and so forth. But in some places, there is a lot of close proximity and so forth. And actually in China today, they still have a large desire for like fresh food. You know, you go into a market, they call them like the fresh markets. Right? When you go get ground beef, you know, how do your parents and so forth go get ground beef? Like, is it already dead? Yeah, and it's all covered in plastics. Like, that's how animals are. They're either running around or they're covered in plastic already chopped up. Well, if you go to a live market, in order to get the freshest food, those animals are going to be there in close proximity with the humans. And if the animals have some disease, then they may be jumping over into the humans in that marketplace. Always, though, you have the concern about the spread of disease if they are living in close proximity to each other. So, we know that large population in China and large population of domestic animals. So that's probably where a lot of those diseases started and still the case today. Spanish flu, I think we mentioned it last time, did we? I think you brought that up. It didn't start in Spain. Probably started in Southeast Asia. It made its way, and then at some point along the way, it got named after Spain. Okay? How big of an impact did the Black Death have on people? Yeah? A big one. Big. I want numbers. What kind of numbers? Did I say that already? I think I did, yeah. A third of the population, yeah. That's right, because you pointed out earlier that some measurements, and in some places it was higher. Some places it wasn't. It's like, can anyone attribute why in some place would there not be that many people die? Interesting question. Two things, and this is very important. We learn this from history, now we have a better understanding. One, maybe not as much contact, all right? So if you're not in as much contact with other people, you might not get it as much, right? So who has an easier, this is kind of a scary question, maybe a little bit too close to home. Who has a greater likelihood of catching COVID? Someone who attends school physically with everyone else, or someone who's doing online learning entirely at home? You're like, really, Mr. Hansen? Thanks. Yeah. Who has a more likelihood of catching something like that? Yeah, and if you have certain situations, yeah. I mean, this is going to be a thing. We'll get to the immune issue here in a moment. But if you have more contact with people, you've got a higher likelihood of catching it. Right? That's one part. So there, easy one. What would you say, Keith? Where are you most likely to be able to catch the Black Death during that time period? In a city or in the rural areas? Why?
Because there's a lot of people.
Exactly. Yeah, so in some of those European cities, you saw high rates of death. Okay? And there was a sense, even then, of if you're around people, chances are you might catch it and die. So literally, sometimes what would happen, as the Black Death was arriving via trade routes into Europe, into southern Europe, as word would come to communities, people would go, I'm out of here. They would just like drop everything and head. Which direction are you going to head? Yeah, north, away from the direction of where you've heard the plague is coming into. I mean, literally, some people are going to respond in such ways that it'll be like, they just drop everything and they're gone. It's kind of crazy. But, I mean, actually, it's not that crazy. It makes a lot of sense. It's a sane response. Immunity, write this down. This is an interesting question. And this is going to help explain a number of things about historical plagues and death and so forth, pandemics. About a third of the population, more in some places than others, got the Black Death and it killed them. Okay, and that's going to have a big impact. A lot of people dying does have an impact on history. But here's an interesting thing. You guys have an understanding that the stuff that you're made up with, just your genetic material, sometimes you have factors of disease resistance. They didn't quite understand that quite back then. They thought that maybe if more people died, it was because they were like wrong and sinful and unrepentant and they did bad things and they deserved to die in sort of like this cosmic religious thing. Okay? I mean, literally, sometimes people would go through, you'll see it in the video, sometimes people would go, it's because I'm not being serious about the wrong things that I've done. And so they would go through the streets and beat their backs as a way of showing that they were really sorry for what they did. Okay? It's a pretty serious way of saying, I'm sorry for whatever I did, so please don't kill me and kill the rest of the people with this disease in this community. Sometimes that actually identify, wow, it's because these people live among us and they're different and we shouldn't let them live among us. So they would scapegoat. They would blame. Have you heard the expression scapegoat? It's like you're going to sacrifice an animal so that all the sins go away. Poor goats. They get dragged and killed and offered to the gods and so forth, or God. Well, if you do that to a group of people who are scapegoats, what happens to them? They get killed. Who do you suppose might end up being a minority group in Europe that ends up getting scapegoated, blamed for the Black Death, and sometimes killed? Jews, yes. Yeah. This is one of those instances in history where it's not a safe position to be in a religious minority, a persecuted religious minority. And as you study history continuing on, it's like, well, at least it got better after that. I don't know, was there any time in the last 100 years that it was really hard for Jews living in Europe? You're nodding your head. When? During what? During the Holocaust. What individual person was probably most responsible for administering and starting and keeping the Holocaust going on with the killing of Jews in Europe? Yeah, Hitler. Yeah, you guys have heard of Adolf Hitler? Yeah, I've heard of Adolf Hitler. Bad guy. He hated Jews. But he had other people who were like, yeah, they didn't blame him for the Black Death at that time, but they had all kinds of things that they were blaming them for unfairly. The reality is that some people managed to do well with the Black Death because they had good genetic resistance. Write that down. They had good genetic resistance. Where did they get their genetic resistance from? Their parents. Ask Mr. Holliday next year when you take health. Are you taking health next year, or is it this year? Next year. Okay. Ask him. It's like, where do children come from? They come from parents. How does that happen? I don't know. But when that happens, the parents give them their genetic stuff. And some of the genetic stuff may be good. It may be really good at fighting diseases, right? If you live, do you pass that on to your next generation? Yes, you do. So here, let me ask you this. In Europe, a lot of the people who died from the Black Death, let's say if it's a young person, are they passing on their genetic lack of resistance to the next generation? No. What is happening to them? They're dying out. So what happens over decade after decade after decade of Europeans being exposed to deadly diseases, and the ones that are genetically not well suited to handle that disease are dying off and not having kids? What happens to the overall disease resistance of the population of Europe? Does it go up or down? It goes up. Yeah, because more and more people as a percentage have got some of that genetic resistance. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? It's like, maybe some of you guys heard of, like, there's people hoping that, like, with COVID, that there'll be enough community immunity or something like that. That there's enough people that are immune to COVID, and so therefore it won't spread as much because then it's not going to take hold on people. And you're like, when's that going to happen? Is like that going to take a month or something? I mean, how long is it before Europe is in a position where many more Europeans are immune to catching the plague? Is it like 5 years, 10 years? We're talking about generations and generations. But you can put that down. Eventually, Europe, Asia, North Africa, these trade areas, eventually we'll see a higher percentage of people with disease resistance. And most of it's because of genetic things. It's not like they got doctors and medicines and things like that. It's like the genes help tell whether you're going to live or whether you're going to die. And there's bad news, because you're going to see this. We'll put this in your notes later on. How much genetic resistance is taking place during the time of the plague and the Black Death in Europe and Asia among people living in America, the Native Americans, or the Polynesians living around the Pacific? How much disease resistance is taking place there? None. Do they have any disease resistance to these like European, Asian types of? No. What's going to happen when a bunch of Europeans and so forth start showing up in those territories? It's going to be bad. You're going to hit like 90, sometimes 95% mortality rate among people in America and the Pacific when exposed to things like smallpox. Yeah. Okay. So, that was fun. I mean, it is part of history. And I hope that, I mean, we're at a good part of history in the sense that if somebody catches COVID, are there good resources available to help that person to survive? Yeah. I mean, we've got hospitals, we've got all kinds of medications and so forth. We hope it doesn't happen. I think some of you guys know, if you've got some pre-existing medical conditions that make it like not so good, right? So you're more susceptible, or you've got breathing issues and so forth, you really don't want to catch COVID. And in fact, I know that, like, for example, there's people, students, for example, that are like, I'm going to keep my potential contact with asymptomatic COVID people down by just staying away, right? And it's a good thing we got technology so that we can have that connection you can learn from home, you know. All right? Questions, comments? Okay, let's do this. Let me see, what are we looking at time? Get to 1:05, there we go. Oh my God. Well, let's get started on this at least. You ready? I need somebody to be a trader in so forth. I got all these various different products. I'll just call it out. You raise your hand, and you're going to be a trader in that item. All right, we got a Mongol horse dealer. Okay? All right, you're a Mongol horse dealer. Okay? Take this. We're not going to play the exact everything that we're doing. We're going to do a reduced version of this. So you're from Mongolia. You trade in horses. From Indonesia, which is like right down here, it's off of the Mongol trade area, but it has a